Right, good evening, everyone. My name is Chris Ogle, and welcome to another of our political special shows. This is the fifth one that we've done. We've had all the other parties on. We were just waiting for the Green Party to announce who their candidate was, but obviously because it was quite late, then the man's been incredibly busy, and Aidan Cottrell-Boyce is the candidate for the Green Party. So just come and say hello, Aidan.
Hello, how are you? It's a pleasure to be with you today, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show. I know you've been really busy out in the constituency doing that trip, stepping the pavements out there. So thanks for coming on the show. And
I've shed a few pounds, I think, over the past fortnight or so.
okay, well, good to have you on here. Now, what I've been saying to people is that Watford is an incredibly important town because on all but two of the last elections in the last 130 odd years, it's always gone the way of the general election results. So it's a real bellwether town. And of course, we've got an even more, if you like, an even more interesting situation now where we've got a number of things going on. We've got obviously the existing, well, he's not the MP anymore, is he? Because we're in that period of time where we haven't got one. But he's standing. We've got Dorothy, obviously the mayor, who's got a long track record in history. So in Watford, some like what she's done. Others are not as complimentary. Then we've got Matthew, who's a councillor, Matthew Tremaine, and we've got UKIP, of course, new on the scene, as it were, and we've got Greens, who are going through a pretty revolutionary period because you've got what's the name of the campaign you've got? About sort of is it Green Surge, is it?
The Green Surge, yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. And actually in Watford, the amount of people that have actually joined the Green Party, I mean, I think it was somewhere in the region of 50 to 60 people, but it must be how many is it now?
Well, I heard that it had gone up by 300%. I don't know if that statistic is accurate, but it was something in that region.
Wow. So, there's obviously people now thinking more about sustainability, maybe thinking about maybe there is another way, a different way of doing things. So I'm really looking forward to this, and I know there's people out there watching who are also really interested to hear what you've got to say, because being so late, if you like, on the scene, there's a lot of people that are not going to get a chance to meet you.
Sure.
So let's get cracking. Tell us a little bit about your history, Aidan, and how you've found yourself in this situation.
Yeah, it's kind of a circuitous route, I guess. I'm not from the southeast. I'm from Liverpool originally. And I sort of found my way down south. I'm a teacher by profession, so I trained as a teacher in Brighton, and then I moved up to London and taught in a comprehensive school in North London for a few years. Then I moved to Cambridge because I started a PhD in Cambridge last year. But so at the moment, what I'm doing, I wear three sort of hats. I'm a PhD candidate, and I supervise undergraduate study at the University of Cambridge. I also teach part-time at a comprehensive school in Camden, and I work for an organisation called Equal Education, which provides at-home tutoring for looked after children, kids who are in care. So I've got three different things going on, and now I'm also also the Green candidate for Watford. So a pretty hectic kind of lifestyle.
What are you trying to do? Catch up with me and have no free time?
Yeah, I know. I'm getting there. I'm catching up with you, Chris. Definitely. I'm sort of edging towards 24/7 living.
So why stand for the Greens? What's happened that suddenly has made you think, actually, I'm going to get into politics?
Well, I think the thing was, I think we're at quite an interesting point in history in terms of the narrative that the Conservative and Lib Dem coalition have flogged to the British people is that, first of all, the economic recession was basically caused by overspending in public services, which is definitely not true, and there's no data to support that, and no serious economic analyst would say that was the case. So you would imagine that in that position, in that situation, the opposition, the official opposition, the Labour Party, would try and propose the opposite narrative, the true narrative, which is that the crash was caused by a number of factors, global factors, and not at all not really linked to public spending in this country. But the problem is that the Labour Party in this country has a problem, a PR problem, basically, in that they're considered to be irresponsible economically. So they can't push that. They can't push that narrative. They can't do it simply for, pragmatic electoral reasons. So we're in a position where there's a complete kind of hegemony around the idea that austerity is the only way to lead us out of recession, when there's absolutely nothing that suggests that that's the case. And the fact is that every serious economist is tearing their hair out at this idea, because generally speaking, throughout history, austerity policies have mired countries and states and economies in greater and greater recession. And I think it's staggering now that we've got a situation where we've had these austerity policies, which for 3 out of the 5 years didn't produce anywhere near the results that the coalition government said they would. Then at some point at the end of those 3 years, they introduced a number of policies to try and stimulate the housing bubble, like Help to Buy and things like that. So we're in a position where we've got a completely, like the worst possible kind of growth imaginable, right? A growth that's completely based on a housing bubble that 4 or 5 years down the line is inevitably going to collapse. And yet we have this narrative being pushed by the coalition government that this is the green shoots of economic recovery and this is all thanks to austerity policies. It is a lie, and it is deeply damaging. And your question was about why I joined the Green Party. I joined the Green Party because I was totally disenfranchised with the Labour Party and totally dispirited by the fact that because they were frightened of the kind of focus group, response to their record on the economy, they can't tell the truth to the electorate. They can't provide any leadership and tell them that austerity doesn't work. And the Green Party is the only party which stands in this country which is anti-austerity. So it was just a no-brainer, basically.
It's really interesting. I mean, I've had conversations with businesses, and you never see a business succeed that's being run by a cost accountant.
Exactly. I mean, if you think about deficit, like every single candidate from the mainstream parties. Now, I saw Dorothy Thornhill say, "Oh, you'd have to be in cloud cuckoo land not to think that paring down the deficit is the most important thing that a government needs to do." If you get a mortgage, you run a deficit, right? If you're investing in a company, you run a deficit for a few years to make sure that you've got sufficient investment. The only reason why you would not run at a deficit is if you thought that the investment that you're making wasn't wise. So if you think the only reason you would say it's the worst case scenario if we have a deficit is if you think that investing in public services, investing in transport and education and health is a wasted investment. Who thinks that? Nobody thinks that. So, it's totally irresponsible and thoughtless and short-sighted and sort of illiterate in economic terms to say that that the priority should be paring down the deficit. Obviously, it's great if you don't have a deficit, but there's no way that should be the priority. There's no way we should be flogging off our public services and cutting back on education and health in order to chase this completely ridiculous goal, which is deficit reduction. That's what I think anyway. I'm sure there's people out there who would disagree with me, but
we're gonna in a little while we'll come on to some of the, if you like, the major manifesto, so hot potatoes, as it were, that the Greens have got, because they've got some interesting ideas. I use interesting because I'm totally unbiased, but there's quite the people of Watford. I'm a firm believer in this. People are actually interested in what's going on around them, and the people of Watford. There's some issues in Watford. There's people out there that are fairly dispirited about some of the things that are happening in Watford. So I'm sure that you'll know about a few of these things, and I just wanted to see what your thoughts were on them, really, and because they'll tie into some of the green thinking, as it were.
Sure.
And obviously those people are going to be interested in your views on that. One of them I want to talk about is the Save Farm Terrace allotment. So I've asked everybody about this, and I'm sure you've had a chance to look at those videos. It's a real hot potato, and obviously it's in this period now where nothing's going to happen until the elections happened.
Yeah.
But you're probably aware of the situation with Sarah Jane Trebar and the court hearings. Where do you sit with it? It's
obviously a tricky one, not being privy to the conversations that go on within the council. But I think the first thing that strikes anybody when they think about this situation, who knows about it, is that it's been really pretty drastically mishandled. You know, back and forth to the courts and all the rest of it. And you can't help thinking, from the outside, you can't help thinking, surely a lot of the time and a lot of the effort and a lot of the money that was spent on, you know, those legal procedures could have been spent trying to figure out an alternative to this. Ian Brandon, when he was on the council, the Green Council, you know, voted, you know, came out against it. And I think for a number of different reasons, I think there was a sense that it's a floodplain, so it's probably not a great idea to build on it anyway. I think there was a sense that it might have been seen as a kind of a face-saving exercise, as it dragged on, kind of a face-saving exercise on behalf of the council, and like probably not the best basis to be making sensible decisions on. And there's also the issue of what is it for? You know, is it a housing development basically? Do you know what I mean? Is it a hospital, or is it because if it's a housing development, then why would you build in the most overpopulated area of Watford? Why, you know, we've got over 1,000 unused homes in Watford. Why would they not be ripe for renovation? Everybody knows that renovation pays dividends across the board in terms of enlivening neighbourhoods, and in terms of, you know, council tax and all the rest. It's the most appropriate way to create housing. Or, you know, I think that the reality is, and you might know more about this than me, from the outside looking in, it seems to me that this is a situation where Watford General had this catastrophic CQC report, right? So they, you know, where the quality of the care was deemed to be below par. They hired something like 160 more nurses in the aftermath of that care quality report. It landed them in something like £140 million worth of debt. So they're in pretty straitened circumstances. And it seems likely that, you know, there's something like, you know, some private investment coming in, and beggars can't be choosers, and the investors might be kind of holding the council's feet to the fire on this. That's my sort of analysis, but it could be that, you know, I'm not privy to those conversations, so it could not be true. But, you know, it doesn't seem like Watford's getting the best deal. I think that's what everybody can agree on.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned about outside investment, because the next topic that I want to just discuss is the Watford market. Now, the Watford market had been in Charter Place for the best part of 40 years, I think it was, and they were basically told that they were moving. They had to move because that building, that part of it, was in the process of being sold to Into, who are going to turn it into IMAX cinema, bowling alleys, restaurants, which, you know, there's no problem with that. 189 million, I think it was, that they paid for the lease for that. And of course the market had to move, and there's all sorts of stories about where it's gone and what options were provided and where could it have gone, and it's ended up where it is, which is, you know, almost under the underpass in the car park that used to be Clements, with not much visibility and foot space onto the, fronting onto the high street. And it's been going on. I don't know whether you've read any of the posts, but it's going on since October, early in October. And it was just drastically underestimated how much the footfall would be reduced by a 200-yard move up the road. And, you know, the market traders are, you know, there's always this to and fro between the different factions, but are you familiar with the situation?
Yeah, and I think it's a difficult one, because you don't want to be in a position where you're bad mouthing it, because it could turn into a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy where everyone thinks it's a failure, I'm not going to go there, and then, you know, it just kind of spirals out of control. So you don't want to be too damning about it. But coming into Watford, when you see it and you find out about the history of it, you know, you get there's a profound impression that local traders are being shunted aside. You know, literally, it couldn't be more dramatically rendered. You know, they're shoved into this tiny corner underneath an underpass or whatever, while massive multinational corporations set up in the centre of town. So, you know, that is, you know, writ large, that kind of image of big business pushing out small business. I think this is actually something that the Greens are actually, you know, without getting too party political about it, I think it is actually something that the Greens are particularly strong on. The manifesto talks a lot about, you know, the Federation of Small Businesses has a number of asks on political parties, and the Greens actually tick a lot of those boxes in terms of making it more financially viable for councils to offer procurement, to prioritise procurement for local businesses, and community investment banks, pledging £2 billion to community investment banks. So I think it's gone awry. I think it doesn't send out a very good message about the value of local business to local economies. Because remember, it's better to have local businesses than it is to have big businesses, because big businesses don't pay any tax. They pay low wages. They employ people on less on worse working conditions. All those kind of things. So it's a shame that it's happened. You don't want to be too negative about it, because there are people who are trying to make a living out of it. You don't want to be too much of a gloomy cloud. But I think it shouldn't really have happened the way it happened. Again, I don't think there's many people who would disagree with that, really.
No, I think you got the key points. They have a feeling they've been marginalised, but at the end of the day, they've all pretty much, I would say, most of those traders have been losing money since October, and they're still there and they're still batting. They want it to work, and a few changes. They've made some changes. They made some changes to the signage just recently and stuff like that. So hopefully, with the summer sun and a bit of good weather, we can see a flip around there, which would be good. We touched on the hospital a bit earlier. I mean, obviously the hospital is in debt, and it's had some poor reviews, although they have been going in the right direction. I understand the CEO's moved on now to a more national role in the health service, but what do you think about the hospital? Where next for the hospital?
Well, I think the main thing is just making sure that investment levels are kept up. Farming out services to private companies is definitely the wrong way to go about it, and it seems to me, again, this is another reason why I've gravitated towards the Green Party. It seems to me the Green Party is the only party which has any kind of commitment to making sure that the NHS stays in public hands 100%. You had this slightly farcical image of Ed Miliband on TV the other night talking about how committed he was to the NHS and the founding principles of the NHS. But he's not at all. He himself has said that he'd be happy with 5% of contracts being fulfilled by private investors. It's just not. I think the way to maintain the levels of public services, generally speaking, and I think there's broadly a national consensus on this, is to make sure that they're in the hands of democratically elected people, and the more that those things are farmed out to exactly what you were saying about to people whose priority is cost cutting and cutting corners. That's the most pernicious thing in terms of the delivery of public services. In the near future, it's difficult to see what's going to happen, but just because they're in such straitened circumstances financially, and nobody likes to say this, but the reality is it's just going to take a lot of investment, I think, to turn it around. I don't think there's any other magic wand that's gonna fix. But you're absolutely right that in terms of its performance as a hospital, it's on the up. But now, the flip side of that is now it's got all these financial problems. So it is a tricky one.
I mean, you all know this because you're in education, but there's also, in my view, if the people in the town took more responsibility for their own health, actually you'd have less people in the hospital because they'd actually be healthier.
Completely, but this is one of those situations where if you're coming at it from a conservative point of view, this becomes a moral issue. That you beat people over the head with that. People aren't taking care of their own health, and you have these Daily Mail headlines about obesity and stuff. The government has a role in terms of shifting the culture, and in terms of shifting practice, business practice in this country. The government has a massive role in changing the way people behave and the way people eat to make sure that their health is better. You know, I don't know if you know this guy Michael Pollan.
Yeah.
About food and the food economy, and in terms of, you know, lots and lots of working class people in this country live on a maize-based diet. You know, if you buy chicken and all the rest of it from Iceland, you know, for £1 for 35 pieces of chicken or whatever it is, that's basically maize that you're eating. But we connect maize with third world economies, you know, with LEDCs, you know, that people over there in poor countries have maize-based diets. But that's not true, you know. And I think if the government takes a more proactive role in trying to curtail some of these business practices, you know, the lowest common denominators approach to food distribution, that would be a massive deal. And again, it's this thing of a long-term investment, thinking 5-6 steps down the line. If we legislate to help people to have healthier diets at lower costs, then, you know, we're not going to have these enormous shortfalls in funding for the NHS. Yeah, you're completely right. Yeah,
I mean, one of the we've covered sort of the main issues with regard to Watford, except one actually, which is gathering a bit of traction, and I mentioned it before we came on air, which was about the Canterbury Park gates, which I promised them that I'd bring it up because actually it wasn't really in full momentum when I was doing the other interviews, but the bit that fronts onto Vic Wandsworth Road used to have some amazing looking gates there. The bricks and the mortar and stuff, that's long since disappeared, I'm sure, and is propping up some shed somewhere in someone's back garden. But there is a movement now to rebuild those, and I know some councillors that are supporting it and saying, well, actually, yeah, that would kind of work for Watford again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you spoke to me about it, I googled it and looked at some of the pictures of it because I didn't know. I didn't know before. It looks absolutely amazing, and it is one of these things where you sort of look back and think, what on earth were they thinking? You know, knocking it down. It's just a different age, I suppose, in terms of, you know, fashion, I suppose, and architecture. But definitely, I think it would be an amazing thing to bring back.
We come on to some of the more national sort of issues now, and there are obviously a number. I mean, there's all sorts. I mean, I haven't read through the entire manifesto, but I want you to just pick up on some of the, let's say, the key things, or things that you believe would have a massive change. I mean, I know I've spoke to Neil on a number of occasions. Neil in Reason, obviously he's a member of the Green Party. And he often tells me about, you know, the living wage and some of these other things. But I just wanted to hear from you, really. What would you take out of the manifesto and say, do you know what, these are the key points that I'd like to get across?
Okay, my hit parade of the Green Manifesto. I think as an educationalist, I think the main thing for me, one of the most striking things for me, and a lot of my colleagues would say the same, is their education policy. I've often thought, you know, because I do research, but I'm also in education. I've often sort of thought about combining the two and doing some pedagogical research. And every time I think about it, I just think, God, that must be the most depressing job imaginable. In that, I don't know any other field where there's such a gulf between research and legislation. You know, so every single piece of research that comes out supports particular models of education, and then the legislation seems to go in exactly the opposite direction. So I mean, so a good example, I guess, would be more comprehensive systems of education. We've never had a truly comprehensive education system in this country, and all the models suggest that by far and away the most successful education systems globally are comprehensive. Like, the more comprehensive your education system is, the better your outcomes. And we were sort of edging towards that, I guess, in like the 70s. And then all of a sudden you have Labour and then coalition governments fragmenting our education system, like literally just going in completely opposite direction of travel to where the research suggests. You have things like, obviously, all the reasonable research suggests that mixed ability teaching is far better than stratified teaching for various different reasons. Stratified teaching is really good. So like sets, is really good at communicating rote learning. So for very short tests, because you need a set of conditions where communication is very easy for a short period of time. That's it. In terms of any other kind of really progressive learning or any kind of thorough learning, mixed ability is much better. Partly, I guess, because if you're explaining something to somebody, then you need to be able to appreciate the different ways in which people think about things, and also in terms of preparing people for life. Life isn't run in sets. You don't go to the clever people's shop and the clever people's bank. You definitely don't go to the clever people's bank. But anyway,
I was having a conversation in a coffee shop this morning about education in general, and it's such a narrow approach in terms of bandwidth that the education system focusing on, with tests about core subjects and then pitting people against each other in a competitive manner, rather than bringing people together and saying, why don't we all help each other here, and why don't we cooperate and collaborate, because the end result will be better, and why don't we broaden the spectrum?
And Chris, like, how much does that feed into wider society? Like how the education system is the sort of incubator for society, isn't it, really? So if you take a 5-year-old and drum it into their head from day one that what they're doing is beating the kid next to them, beating the kid next to them, beating the kid next to them, then that's the kind of society that you're fostering in that. And anyway, so basically that's the Green Party is trained towards, it's evidence-based in terms of education. So it says, let's look at the best models for education around the world and let's be more like them. Let's have more comprehensive education. Let's have mixed ability teaching. Let's have a free university system. And meanwhile, the Conservatives, so they've done this massive academies experiment, which, at a time of austerity has cost the taxpayer a huge amount of money and left, the education system completely fractured. And you have a situation like Watford where you have a massive shortage of school places, whereas in other places in London, there's a surplus of school places. That's what happens when you don't have a centralized education policy. And also, people like Nicky Morgan saying that setting will be a prerequisite for schools being given outstanding status by Ofsted. I mean, you would leave if you were fully immersed in educational theory, it would just leave you pulling your hair out, because it's completely the opposite of everything that all the received wisdom. Anyway, but so it's really refreshing to read proper evidence-based legislation being put in a manifesto. I'm not saying that's just because at the end of the day, I guess there's a good reason why, you have fringes of the Conservative Party, which are for grammar schools and and all these ideas about academies and things like that. It's because it's a vote winner. You have campaigns in the Daily Mail, the Daily Express saying, bring back grammar schools, or like give more freedom to head teachers and things. And it's just completely counterintuitive and counter-evidential.
I mean, one of the hottest topics I think for this election is about immigration, and there are various parties who are beating that drum, but immigration and jobs and minimum wage, obviously all of this is linked together really in a cauldron. So how do the Greens sit on these types of issues? Where are you guys?
I think it's a weird one, immigration, in that it's actually a range of different questions that are all put in the same grammar. Do you know what I mean? So people are actually saying things which are offensive and which aren't offensive, but they're expressing them in exactly the same way. So I think if you're talking about, well, first of all, so basically, I think what's really happening, if you're just talking in pragmatic electoral terms, UKIP have come along and they've scooped up a huge amount of the electorate by saying we're going to stand on a platform of anti-immigration. Basically, you have the leading political parties who, again, it's this issue of vote acquisition rather than leadership. So instead of saying, actually, here are the arguments, here's the evidence, make up your own mind, and we on principle stand, against UKIP on this issue, they just go, yeah, us too, we're against immigration. And I think it's it's exactly that kind of thing which actually makes people feel so dispirited about democracy in general, because you have no leadership whatsoever. You just have these people who are absolutely enthralled to the focus groups, and that's the only thing that makes them make any decisions. So that's the first thing, I think, that there's zero leadership on this issue. In terms of actually thinking about what the immigration issue is about, if you're saying immigration is bad because immigrants hurt the economy and immigrants come over here and nick our benefits, then you're wrong, because there's no evidence whatsoever for that. So we can leave that argument aside, because EU migrants and other migrants are net contributors to our economy. So there's an argument for kicking out all the English people and just keeping the immigrants, if you're talking in economical terms, but there's no argument for the other way around whatsoever. The second thing is about culture. And I think a lot of people talk about the immigration issues, and they talk about it in one way, but they're actually what they're talking about is diluting British culture. And I can understand why people feel that way. People find change difficult. That's not a cardinal sin. That's not something that you should be hung, drawn, and quartered for. But what they need, if they see their neighbourhoods changing and they feel uncomfortable about it, is guidance and support, and politicians saying to them, this is why this is a good thing. Because I genuinely think diversity is basically the same as progress. If you have a diverse society where people come from different backgrounds, have different ideas, have different culture, that helps you to examine theirs, be aware of theirs, and examine your own. You need to know what other people think in order to really think carefully about what you think. So I think diversity is a really good thing, and we should have people explaining or helping people to understand why diversity can be a good thing. The third thing, which you touched on, I think, is in terms of jobs, and I think this is that's a very reasonable thing to worry about. If you're saying EU migration undercuts wages of British workers, and so the wages being paid to British workers is coming down because of EU migration. That's right to an extent, but it skips a step, okay? Because it says EU migrants come here. The step that you skip is saying we have a work market, a labour market which is underregulated. So if you're saying they come over here and they drive our wages down, no, the government it allows a situation to carry on in which people have their wages driven down. We live in a wealthy country. We have a democratically elected government. We can legislate to make sure that people don't get paid poor wages, regardless of whether there is EU migrants here or not. Do you see what I'm saying? So when you say the EU migrants come over here and they're driving our jobs down, you're completely letting your democratically elected officials off the hook, because it's their job to make sure that people don't get paid bad wages and work in poor working conditions. It's not the responsibility of the EU migrants. All they want to do is come over here and work. Do you know what I mean? It's not their responsibility to sit at home and think, oh, I don't want to go over there because I might injure the pay packet of a British person. Why would that be their priority? It's the priority of the British government, of the elected officials that we put in Parliament. So, and the reason why that conversation doesn't really come up in Parliament is because it's much easier to say we'll cap immigration than it is to say we'll protect workers' rights. That's a much easier conversation to have. That's a much easier thing to sell, especially when you have right-wing populism in the country, right-wing populist parties in the country, which are drumming up support for that point of view. So you've got a choice. If you're a Labour or a Conservative politician, you can either say, I'm going to speak up for workers' rights, and I'm going to do something. I'm going to pen some legislation to make sure that workers, Polish workers, Czech workers, French workers, Australian workers, and British workers get paid a living wage. Or you can say, you know what, you're right, immigrants are bad. And it's the easiest. It's the way of least resistance, isn't it? Anyway.
Yeah, I kind of get that. They can make they can count people in and out of the country. Well, they can't, but they could much easier than try and convince business people that they should be paying a minimum wage.
I guess. Sorry to interrupt. Sorry, I guess there is.
No, carry on.
There is definitely an argument for you know, if you, I'm trying to use the word, the phrase carefully, but I guess controlled immigration, in the sense that you should know, this is just common sense, you should know who's in the country and who isn't in the country. Like, that's definitely true. And so we should have a more effective way of making sure that immigration is monitored. But yeah, I think segueing rapidly from that into all these other conversations about culture and diversity and the labour market is a bit of a Trojan horse, really. And I think that it's one that all parties use: Labour, Lib Dem, Conservative, and UKIP. And I think that's another real principal reason why I felt so completely disenfranchised by the mainstream parties, because I just felt there was no leadership on this. You know, you want a Labour Party politician, when somebody comes up to them and says immigration is bad, you want them to say, I want a Labour Party politician to say to them, you're wrong, read a book and then come back, not, you know what, you're right, vote for me. Do you know what I mean? That's leadership, that's democracy. The other way is just spineless, it's cowardly. Anyway.
So what about some of the other things? I mean, living wage is a term I've heard around. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that.
So it's kind of surprising to me that there's even a conversation about whether we should be paying the living wage, given what that phrase means. The living wage means the amount of money that you need to be paid in order for you to live, in order for you to have a roof over your head and food on your table. Now, if we're in a developed country, a civilized country, then that should be the kind of thing that we want all our citizens to have. These are positive rights, not negative rights. You know, we talk a lot about negative rights, you know, in terms of, I don't want that person in my personal space, or I don't want this person intruding on me, etc., etc., etc. They're valuable things. But we should also be thinking about positive rights. We should say every single person in this country has a right to be given medical attention if they get sick. We should be saying every single person in this country has a right to be educated to the standard where they can read and engage in the democratic process. We should be saying every single person has a right to be paid so that they can live. You know, that's what a living wage is, being paid enough so that you can live. And so it's an ethical issue, but it's also a really pragmatic economic issue. When we pay the majority of welfare cuts in terms of that this government has enacted have hit working people, not people who are out of work, not people who are sitting on the sofa watching EastEnders omnibuses. It's hit people who are in work. Now, when you do that, when you say the government's going to top up your wages because you don't get paid enough, even if you work full time, you don't get paid enough to put a roof over your head and food on your table, then what we're doing is just subsidizing companies. You know, the taxpayer is writing a check to, you know, IMAX, or writing a check to McDonald's, writing a check to all of these companies, because we're saying, you know what, you're right. You shouldn't have to pay people enough that they can live on. We'll sort that out for you. That's not right. They should be, if they're employing British people, if they're employing people living in this country, then the government should stand up to those companies and say, if you're employing these people, then you pay them enough to live on. That should be enshrined in legislation. Not, yeah, you pay them £4 an hour and we'll sort out the rest. That's why would we be letting them off the hook like that? It just doesn't make any sense to me. These aren't the people that we should be protecting. You know, we shouldn't be protecting McDonald's. We should be protecting working people.
Absolutely. I mean, we're getting close to the end of the interview now, which has been fascinating. But I know that you've been attending a few hustings, and I've heard reports you've been doing quite well. So congratulations on that. But you're also
hubristic, you know.
But you've also been out and about on the streets a lot too. What are you hearing from the people on the streets? Tell me what your experience of that whole exercise has been so far. What are the key learnings you've got so far?
I'll tell you exactly what I've been hearing on the streets. I've been hearing, I'd love to vote Green, but I can't. And that is, you know, if you're an activist for the Green Party, that is the most frustrating thing, because you can. If you vote Green, if everybody who'd said that sentence to me voted Green, we'd have a landslide. And I just think it's so, again, you know, I've talked a lot in kind of despairing tones about democracy in this country, but that's one of the things that I think that a lot of people find inspiriting, that they feel like This is a political party that resonates with me, that has policies that I agree with, but because the way this system is set up, I feel like it would be a wasted vote. So that's partly the responsibility of legislators to change our electoral system to make it more fair. But it's also the responsibility of the electorate. Most politicians don't really talk about that. Don't really talk about, you know, finger wagging at the electorate and saying you've got a responsibility, but you do. I think you do have a responsibility to vote for the party which you think you agree with. I think, you know, being a citizen in a democracy isn't a passive experience; it's an active experience. You should be actively seeking to change the direction of your country. Otherwise, it makes a nonsense of the whole system. So, at risk of sounding like a school teacher, but you know, if you believe that the Green Party has the right policies, you should vote for the Green Party, and it's as simple as that.
Fantastic. Okay, well, I can't think of a better place to stop. You have to have said those ultimate words there. That I'm going to do another round of interviews, and what I want to do is engage with some people in the street. So if you'd like to come on again, it'll probably be a different host, but I'd probably be out on the streets a bit like I did today, just stopping people and sort of asking them what they think about whoever it is that's on the interview and what would they consider voting, so that we can get some feedback. Maybe if they've got a question, is that something you'd be happy to do?
Absolutely, sounds fantastic. And at risk of being sycophantic, I do genuinely think it's amazing, and this is an amazing tool for democracy in Watford. This channel and all the things that you're doing. So congratulations to you.
Thank you very much. So that's it. So thank you very much for coming on the show, and this will be up on YouTube very shortly. So please do share it amongst the people that in the party, and make sure that it gets out there, because the people of Watford need to know who's standing to represent them, and yeah, that's really what the role of this show's about. It's about getting them that extra bit of connection that they might not normally be able to do. So thanks very much.
Cheers, man. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Okay, bye now.
Bye.